In this video, we're going to talk about the WOB family connectors at FasTest. Now, what's different about these connectors compared to our normal bail connectors is this WOB connector has a pneumatically actuated RPV pin, which is supplied by an independent gas line on the back of the connector. Our more traditional bail connectors have a spring-loaded RPV pin, which we cover in other videos. But for this video, we're talking about the WOB connector and its special RPV pin actuation.
Yep, and they're typically used for IntelliOx or WOB style cylinders, among other applications as well. And in this video, we're going to cover the installation of this WOB style connector, along with its unique operation and its maintenance. Cut.
Okay.
All right, for installing your WOB style connectors, it's pretty straightforward, but it's also a little different than our normal bail connectors. You can see you've got two different fittings to choose from here. This is your main fill pressure line. This is what you're going to connect just like you do on our normal bail handle connectors. And you can connect that with a flexible hose, or very commonly these are rigidly mounted into a manifold. This line here, this is your pneumatic line, your lower pressure pneumatic line that operates your RPV. You'll want to also install a fitting into there. So we do typically recommend nitrogen around 80 to 120 psi for this fitting here. And you're going to want to use approved thread sealant or thread tape for both of these connections. When you are tightening these, do make sure you use wrench flats on both the fitting and the termination on the connector. It is important to get the proper alignment on this connector, as we'll get into here.
And also, when you are attaching those hoses, you want to make sure that the hose length is the correct length so that the connector is oriented properly. Cylinder alignment with this connector is very, very critical, and I'm going to demonstrate with this WOB right over here. So, in situations where this connector is going to be used for rigid mounting, you really want to make sure that the weight of the cylinder is supported by the rack that supports all the cylinders. What you don't want to have is the cylinder, once you make the connection, you don't want the connector to support the weight of the cylinder. We call it floating. We don't want it floating like this. You want the weight of the cylinder supported by the rack and have the valve just drop into the connector. It's very important to do that because that's going to ensure a proper connection and a proper seal. And then obviously our PV pin actuation. Operation of this connector is real simple, but before we do that, we're going to talk about inspection. The first thing you want to do, just like any of our other connectors, you always want to make sure that the bail operates nice and smooth, make sure there's no issues there, make sure there's no dents or dings on the body of the connector itself. You also want to take a peek at that front O-ring, make sure the O-ring is in good condition, make sure there's no cuts or anything. You want to make sure you get a nice seal against the face of the valve. You want to talk about the RPV?
Yeah, so the RPV pin, which is inside of the connector, you can access a little bit of a view when you open the connector. You want to make sure that's in good condition, it's not bent or damaged. You'll also want to actuate the pin and take a look at the whole pin, make sure it does extend when pressure is applied to the back body. And you also want to take a look at your collets here, make sure they're all in good working order, they're not dented or dinged up, and make sure they're opening and closing along with the connector. And any other damaged components, if you have a dented sleeve, it might prevent the connector from operating properly, along with any other bent or damaged components like a handle. Just make sure none of that's damaged and you should be good to go.
Operation of this connector is very similar to our bail connectors, which we've covered in a separate video. But for this video, we're going to demonstrate making a connection using a WOB connector as if the connector was rigidly mounted. So we take your WOB, and you set it on the rack. Like I mentioned earlier, you're going to make sure the cylinder is resting on the weight of the rack, and then the valve you'll want to align with the connector to the actual collets. And then you make the connection.
All right, so once you make your connection, you've made all the connections on your rack, then you can apply your pneumatic pressure to extend your RPV pin. Now you have access to full cylinder pressure. Then you can do your vent back and your fill process there. A few things that can potentially happen is when you're trying to remove the connector. Normally the handle should swing open just like that, no problem, but maybe it gets stuck. In a rare occurrence, what happens is there's a stop pin internal here And just like our bail handle connectors, there's a pin that comes out under pressure. This may get stuck potentially, and you may have to push it in. This is a rare occurrence, but if it does happen, you can grab a pick or a real small screwdriver and just reach around and push through that hole and pop that pin back in, and then you should be able to open your connector up just fine again. Another tip is if you're having problems with the threads engaging on the cylinder valve and maybe there's a little hang up here, you can just remove it, give your collets a little twist, and again, that's just making sure that you're not going peak to peak on your thread connections, and you peak to valley, and then you can make a nice smooth connection.
To replace the seals on a WOB style connector, it's really easy. All you need is a extra pack of seals and a sharp pick, and you usually can do this while keeping the connector still in service, but really just have access to the front of the connector here. Use your pick to dig the old seal out, discard that, grab a new one from your box of seals, and just pop it in by hand. And really that's all that's needed to be done for maintenance on the WOB style of connectors in general. And always get your seals from FasTest.
Full operating instructions are available on our website along with replacement parts.
And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to Fast Sales.
Thank you again for being a valued FasTest customer.
Thank you.